Welcome to week 33 to Beloved Blackness. I'm Dr. B. So I am full of a lot of thoughts today. This is the week that the off-duty Dallas white woman police officer was found guilty of murdering Brother Botham and then sentenced to 10 years, followed by being hugged by a black woman judge who was endorsed by the Dallas Police Department and given this judge's personal Bible along with a hug, as well as embraced and hugged by Brother Botham's brother, and expressions of wanting to befriend the murderer were also offered by Brother Botham's father. So I want to kind of deconstruct and think through this some. And I want to think through it through the lens of trauma, but also talk about how re-traumatizing the images, the stories have been for much of the Black community. And that there's been a religious, spiritual, Christian lens that has been expressed as a way of framing, particularly the brother's behavior. I haven't heard much about that framing in terms of the judge's behavior, but in terms of the brother's behavior. And I guess the first thing I want to say is we have to think about, like, part of what I've shared in the past in terms of the 4 phases of oppression that Dr. Linda James Myers talks about. What's really important when you think about the impact of the Maafa, the trauma that people of African descent have gone through in terms of the physical disconnect and rupture, being kidnapped from our motherland, and then the psychological impact of being having your cultural history and tradition be denied access to it and then negated, and then to have the history and experiences of the oppressor to be elevated. So the impact of that psychologically is so deep and profound that to see it be emblematic in how the brother in particular reached out and expressed this hug towards his brother's murderer is really powerful. In that image, it embodied a lack of valuation of his own pain, his family's pain, and the excruciating disregard and disrespect that was demonstrated by this capital offense, like this was a murder. And it overvalued the emotional expression of tears by the murderer. I'm not quite sure if contrition was really there, or even an acknowledgement of wrongdoing had even been given. But that there was an overvaluation of a white woman's experience of her consequence without a full without the ability to hold space for the reality of the trauma what the family had gone through, let alone the hurt, the pain, the anger, the anguish, the confusion, the wrestling. And as a survival, as a people, we haven't been fortunate to have the space to be in process, to wrestle with our feelings around the trauma that we have experienced since we've been forced to this land and our lands, not just the United States, but across the Americas. And to have the re-traumatization of seeing the brother hug her reminded us of how little our emotional experience has been made. There's been space made for them, for our emotions, and our experience as a whole has been invalidated, disregarded, minimized, even scrutinized. But there's something about the public eye of needing to be respectable, needing to make sure that our emotions do not lead white people to feel uncomfortable, and black people who are associated with whiteness to feel uncomfortable. And with that point, I think there's so much. I started Beloved Blackness, feeling compelled to do so out of the strength of one of my mentors, Baba Kobe's belief and faith in what he saw in me. And I remember one thing he would say is, when we really truly understood white supremacy domination, we won't be surprised by its manifestations. That what will surprise us are the things that are anomalies. And so when we see, the sentence being 10 years, when you understand white supremacy domination, that doesn't surprise you. You have feelings about it, right? It's maddening, it's upsetting, but it's not a surprise. And so when we see the hug and some of us feel surprised by it, it's because we haven't really had space to think about how much the trauma, how much our collective trauma has impacted us psychologically, that there would be a celebration for this man taking a step that there's no way, it's not even humanly possible in terms of psychologically possible for him to be at a stage of forgiveness, because forgiveness is a process. And to see that as something that is worthy of attaining towards is rooted in our anti-blackness. It's not rooted in anything that would even be a semblance of what Christ would desire in terms of the pain and agony of what this family has to face. That the idea that we will disregard and overvalue the feelings of a white woman who's murdered our brother or our family member or our community member, or someone who could have been a family member, all of who Brother Botham represents to us, it reminds me of, you hear stories of kids who were sexually violated or molested by family members, and parents who say, go hug Uncle so-and-so, go over there, he your family, go hug him. It wreaks that level of violation for me, as I witnessed it, that obviously nobody was forcing the brother to hug her, but there's a way in which we have so internalized that our place is to be sure to have the abuser, the perpetrator of harm, of death, to be comfortable, that we invite that level of violation, the lack of honoring, the being able to stand forth in your truth and dignity and know that this brother deserved to have peace in his own home and not to have this woman come in and shoot him in cold blood. It aches and pains me when I see the expression of our trauma in this way. And I want us to think over the next week about ways that we can honor our emotional experiences as we think about so many collective and historical harms that our people have experienced and continue to experience. Hold space for that this week. Hold space for your pain. Hold space for your anger. Hold space for your sorrow. Hold space for your grief. Hold space. We are worthy of holding space and taking the time needed to process our trauma.